Welcome to this explainer. I'm so thrilled to be diving into this with you today. We're going to take a fascinating journey right into the human mind to figure out a really universal struggle. Look, we all live on this planet, and I think it's fair to say most of us genuinely want to protect it. But let's be totally honest with ourselves for a second.
Why do we fail to act, even when we deeply care? Really think about it. You might recycle religiously, right? But then you drive a gas-guzzling car to work every single day. Or maybe you donate to environmental causes, which is amazing, but then you take 20-minute hot showers. There is just this massive disconnect between what's in our hearts and what we actually do in our day-to-day lives.
This right here is what researchers call the sustainability puzzle, and honestly, it is arguably the absolute most critical puzzle of our time. Solving environmental issues like global warming, it isn't just about inventing better solar panels or, more efficient batteries. It is really about figuring out the human element. The science is totally there. The technology is advancing at breakneck speed, but human behavior, that is the bottleneck. Our everyday behaviors tell a drastically different story from our stated values.
Section 2. Real-world roadblocks. Okay, let's dive into this by looking at some historical reality checks. Why can't we just pay people to care, or tax them into submission? History shows us pretty clearly that throwing money at environmental problems doesn't just magically solve them. Let's look at 3 powerful case studies that prove this point.
First up, let's travel back to the United States in the 1980s. The government rolled out this program called the Residential Conservation Service. The deal was incredible. I mean, free home energy audits and low-interest loans to make your home more energy efficient. Logically, everyone should have jumped at this to save some cash, right? Well, the reality was that very few people actually applied. But here is the real kicker. Of the few who actually did retrofit their homes, their energy use didn't even substantially drop. Why? It's because of what psychologists call the rebound effect. Once their homes were more efficient, people just kind of relaxed their other conservation habits. They left the lights on way longer, or they cranked up the heat, essentially eating right through all those potential energy savings.
Now, let's look at the total illusion of price. In a really fascinating study over in Western Australia, researchers asked people who had installed solar water heaters exactly why they did it. Their number one answer? To save money. Then they went and asked people who hadn't installed them why they chose not to, and their number one answer? It costs too much money. Literally the exact same factor. This brilliantly illustrates the paradox of price. The economic cost was exactly the same in both cases, but the psychological interpretation of that cost was completely different.
Finally, consider the whole idea of simply taxing bad behavior, like throwing a carbon tax on things. During the 1970s OPEC oil embargoes, energy prices absolutely skyrocketed, and demand for energy did drop, which, sounds like a total win for the environment on paper. But economists point out this wasn't because people suddenly adopted these amazing sustainable habits. It was because the price shock caused a massive macroeconomic recession. People just had way less money to spend on absolutely everything. So this shows us that bluntly pricing out bad behavior often just triggers widespread economic damage, rather than magically creating sustainable long-term habits.
Section 3, the 4 psychological models. So the crucial takeaway here is that we've been trying to solve a really deep psychological problem with completely the wrong tools. Traditionally, psychology has relied on 4 distinct models to try and explain these failures. But as we'll see, each of these puzzle pieces has a pretty massive blind spot.
Here are those 4 heavyweights. First, the rational economic model, which essentially assumes we act purely based on a strict financial cost-benefit analysis. Second is the social dilemmas model, which looks at the tragedy of the commons, basically how individuals act selfishly when they're sharing a public resource. Third, we have the attitude behavior model, assuming that if you hold a pro-environment attitude, you're obviously going to act pro-environmentally. And fourth is the behavioral analysis approach. This one is drawn straight from B.F. Skinner, and it tries to train us almost like lab rats using direct rewards and punishments.
But here is where it all falls apart, the blind spots. We already saw how the rational model totally ignores that cost is completely subjective. Then the attitude model struggles because, let's face it, our attitudes are pretty static and they constantly get overridden by everyday inconveniences. The behavioral model fails because the absolute second you stop handing out those financial rewards, people immediately revert right back to their old habits. But the most fascinating blind spot definitely belongs to the social dilemmas model. See, in a lab experiment, if you overconsume a shared resource, it runs out and everyone suffers. But in the real world, governments engage in what we call consumer protection. If a city's running out of water, the government just builds another dam. We literally destroy an ecosystem just so the consumer never actually has to feel the shortage. Think about it. If the resource never actually runs out for the user, Why on earth would they ever change their behavior?
Section 4. Seeing environmental affordances. Let's move on and see how all of this builds into a truly brilliant new paradigm. Researcher Tim Kurz argues that we really need to ditch these isolated theories and embrace a much more holistic social ecological framework. And it all starts with literally changing how we view the everyday objects around us.
The absolute foundation of this framework is a concept called affordances. Now, don't let that academic word intimidate you. An affordance is simply what an object allows you to do. It's its potential utility. So when you look at a car, you instantly perceive that it affords transportation, right? It allows you to get to work. But crucially, that exact same car also affords pollution. It affords the burning of fossil fuels. So everyday objects don't just have one single function. They have multiple affordances baked right in.
And that leads us right into attunements. This is what we are naturally wired to focus on. Imagine turning on your shower in the morning. You are intensely attuned to the affordance of personal hygiene and, just getting warm and comfortable. You are practically blind to the affordance of draining a local reservoir or consuming huge amounts of energy to heat that water. The environmental impact is basically invisible to you in that exact moment.
But hey, what if you actually do see that environmental impact? Well, you still need the effectivities. These are the practical skills and the actual hands-on know-how required to take a sustainable action. I mean, it is one thing to realize your shower is wasting a ton of water. It is another thing entirely to know exactly which low-flow shower head to buy, where to go get it, and how to actually use a wrench to install the thing. Without those effectivities, simple awareness is kind of useless.
So this elegantly maps out that entire journey. You encounter an environmentally relevant object, let's say your washing machine. First, you perceive its affordances. Are you attuned just to getting clean clothes, or are you also attuned to the water consumption? Then, you evaluate your behavioral options in light of those specific affordances. And this is actually where your pro-environmental attitude finally kicks in. It acts as a guide for your evaluation. Finally, equipped with your effectivities, you act out the behavior that you deem appropriate. It's this incredibly dynamic, constant cycle of interaction with the world around you.
Section 5. Shaping our social ecology. Over the next 5 to 10 years, the future of environmental policy, and frankly the future of our planet itself, depends almost entirely on how we shape these interactions. We just can't do it in isolation anymore.
Because human behavior is deeply fundamentally socially embedded, we have to modify our environment collectively. How do we actually get people to see the hidden environmental affordances of their daily lives? Through conversation and observation. When you talk with your neighbors about water usage, you are actively shifting public discourse. When you let your front lawn brown off a bit during a drought, or maybe apply mulch instead of running the sprinklers, you are making sustainable behavior totally visible. You are literally training the people in your community to see the environmental impact of their own behaviors.
Section 6. Takeaways for tomorrow. So how do we actually bring this grand psychological theory down to earth? Here are the practical, everyday lessons that you can apply immediately to start overcoming the sustainability puzzle in your own life and in your own neighborhood. First, change your attunement. Tomorrow morning, challenge yourself to look right past the primary function of your daily appliances. Really try to see the energy and the water that they're consuming. Second, equip yourself with those effectivities. Learn the skills. Figure out how to weather strip your windows or adjust the settings on your water heater. Third, talk about these hidden impacts loudly with your peers. Make it a conversation. And fourth, model the behavior publicly so that others can casually observe and learn directly from you.
The author of this research ends with just a wonderfully powerful vision. If we can shift what we talk about and what we model for each other, we don't need artificial financial rewards from the government at all. We essentially become an army of Confederates, these like-minded allies permanently implementing a behavioral intervention strategy in a community. By changing our social environments, we can permanently alter our collective behavior for the better.
I really want to leave you with this one thought. When you wake up tomorrow and you interact with the ordinary, everyday objects in your home, your coffee maker, your car, your thermostat, what hidden affordances will you finally see? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, keep observing, and let's go change the way we interact with the world around us.